Right, I think everybody is coming on board now, so welcome everybody to this webinar this afternoon, brought to you by the Waikato and Bay of Plenty Maths Network of Expertise. I'm Andrew Marshall, I'm the kaiarahi for these regions. I've been teaching for about 25 years, and I've taught from year 3 right through to year 13. I've taught overseas and international schools as well. And most recently, I've been the curriculum leader for maths at Rototuna Senior High since it started 3 years ago. This webinar is going to be recorded and we're going to post it onto our YouTube channel. As it plays out, feel free to ask questions on the chat on Zoom. We'll attempt to answer them. Those questions we can't answer straight away. If we don't have time, we will try to answer those in a follow-up email. I would like to say we have read through all of the questions that have come through on the registration. There are too many for us to answer tonight, but we will cover as many of them. We hope to bring you more material specific to beginning teachers in the coming months, so look forward to that. I'm joined today by Jordan Simmons, the founder and facilitator of EDUdots, which is a support program designed to help schools develop beginning teachers. So Jordan, perhaps you want to give us a bit of an intro of yourself and move into the first part of the talk.
Choice. Thanks, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Andrew and I were just chatting about how beautiful this afternoon is, specifically here in Kirikiriroa. So maybe you'll be able to enjoy a bit of sunshine in the coming days ahead. So a bit about me briefly. I have taught for a decade across 3 quite different schools, with a short international escapade in between as well. In these roles, I've been the specialist classroom teacher, a mentor, a PCT facilitator, and also supporting a professional development. So throughout these 10 years, a key observation I've had, and it might be sentiments that some of you share today, is the support that is crucially needed for our beginning teachers. So much so that in the first 3 to 5 years, we see our highest turnover of staff in this profession. Which is really concerning because we attract some amazing teachers and the end game's just not there, and we can be doing more to support you guys. So a little bit about EDUdots. I felt that the opportunity was there in which we could reach out, continue to build this network throughout Aotearoa, give back to the education sector, and essentially get passionate individuals in front of our learners. EDUdots has 3 main platforms. One is that we tailor support programs for PCTs in schools. The other one is consulting the internal facilitators and tailoring a program. And the other aspect is mentoring and providing external consultation, because sometimes you really need a removed perspective to let you know what's happening, and there's not as much emotional attachment with a program when you're soundboarding against someone not in the mix. So we're going to chat through a few things today, of which I'm really passionate about. So I hope sometimes it's not a bit over the top. We'll see how we go. Andrew and I were also saying we recognise quite a few names coming in today, so it's lovely to already reach out and connect with people that we have encountered in the past. Yeah,
it's great to see that we've had over 100 registrations for this webinar right across the country. There's definitely a need we can see, and I'll be talking with the regions up and down the country to try to provide more of this sort of thing, because yeah, it's a good way to get in there.
Awesome.
Yep.
So one of our first topics or points to cover today is teaching identity. And I'm looking at a few of your faces here and sitting in the screens, and I can see we're approaching the end of the term. There's a lot that's on top for teachers, and too often we just hit the ground straight into our work without realizing who we actually want to be as a teacher. And until you know what's important to you and your values in teaching, you can very easily get lost in the administration of teaching, which again, we've been having a little bit of a korero around that. So an activity I want people to think about, and Andrew and I have done this for homework before today, is what are 3 attributes that are essential to you as a teacher? Once you know what these 3 values are, you can better blueprint who you want to be. And from there, your actions, your planning, your interactions should organically start occurring. So I asked Andrew during the week what his 3 attributes were. Key point before we get into this is 25 years of teaching and 10 years of teaching. This is not something I did in my first year of teaching. I think it's something I've grown to over time. So it's a bit of an advantage to start thinking about it now, whereas ours is a mixture of hindsight and maybe idealistic, hoping we were like this at the beginning, but we'll see. So Andrew,
Yep.
what were your three?
3 words for me is funny, honest, and patient. And I know that I can connect with students if they feel that there's a bit of humor and that I'm going to have some aspect of lightheartedness to the whole classroom and comfortable atmosphere in the classroom. So yeah, humor without a doubt is huge to the success of building relationships with the students. Being honest, I'd love my students to be describing me as honest. There's a lot of other words related. Honest, genuine, down to earth, a real person. I never liked teachers when I was a kid who I felt were being a bit false when they were talking to us or talking down to us, that sort of thing. Being patient, being a good listener, and having time to set aside to individuals when they have questions. And I know students have given me that feedback that that's what they really need, and they really appreciate it when I can give that to them.
Funny, honest, patient. Yeah, so key thing you said is humor, and later on we're going to be moving on to relationships. And a really good strategy actually is if you do have some of that banter and rapport with students, you find that that can be somewhat helpful to mitigate issues that occur. And sometimes the old dad joke humor, I think actually students won't laugh because they're teenagers. Some of them have facial expressions but don't always choose to use them in the classroom. So it's hard to know sometimes if you're getting through, but they remember those dry moments of teaching as well. The honest point is really important, and I think we're going to come to that later, because owning who you are as a teacher in front of your learners is a really powerful moment. It helps to that hierarchy that sometimes is teacher and students. And I think you use the word real, which
real,
I like.
Genuine, down to earth.
Yeah. So my 3, similar in some ways. I had listener. I definitely wasn't this when I started out in teaching. I'm a pedantic, cross the T's, dot the I's person. And I thought that my planning and my theory and knowing my curriculum was enough. So my ears weren't always switched on. And I think further on down the track, I've really come to appreciate the importance of listening, not just of your students, your colleagues, very much so, and also whānau when they're coming in, getting to know what they're saying, and more importantly, why, which is what you get from listening.
I'll just say there, add to that, as new teachers, you hear a lot about the importance of building relationships with students. You don't get to hear so much about the importance of building relationships with your colleagues at the school or with the whānau at home. And that can make or break your career success, basically. I have described teaching to some people as it is like you're working in a factory, but you have morning tea and lunch with the workers in the factory across the road. And they're the adults, they're the other teachers, because you don't work with teachers, you work with students all the time. So you actually have to go out of your way to build positive relationships with your colleagues, get them to know you as well. Real important.
I think I was really lucky in my first 2 years of teaching with that. I was in an incredibly strong English department, so we naturally had that vibe going on. I went to the staff room, I can probably count on both my hands in the whole year, because I got very much caught up in the student side of things and being there with the students and the marking, the planning, setting my whiteboard up perfectly. So the time that went into that rather than going into the staff room. And I think they call it 2-minute management when you're having chats with colleagues, and it doesn't take much time out of your day. But it makes work so much more enjoyable as well. I think I've got 2 more words. I had reliable. Why this was important to me, I think students really respond to knowing what's going on. Spontaneity is okay, time and a place, but kids like to know routine. It helps them feel secure in their learning, and it breeds accountability. They know that the teacher's reliable, therefore, hopefully over time, they too become reliable in their actions as well. And the final word I had was approachable. Why this was important is I'm hoping the proof's in the pudding with that one. You need to have people being able to come to you to politely correct your practice or embrace feedback, whether it's students, colleagues. We're really scared of feedback as teachers sometimes, and I don't want to brand all teachers with that, but it can be quite confronting getting feedback, and we don't often look at it as a constructive. I'm thinking of observations at the beginning, and you might have had, you were having 2 observations this term, here's they are. That might not be the most approachable for you. Maybe you prefer someone to pop into your lessons every now and again. But by being more approachable, we learn a lot more as well. So approachable, reliable, and a listener. And I believe we're going to send some of these activities to you all as a follow-up. So hopefully we've planted a few seeds to get you thinking, what are your 3 words? Or what would people think your 3 words are? Because perception of 3 words to describe you versus how you want to describe yourself could be quite different. Yeah. So we might just share the screen onto one of those documents there. So this preview one, that one, there we go. Just bear with us while we're going to load up. So we're just going to put on some of the aspects of those 3 words we were talking about. You might want to take a screenshot of it, but again, we'll send this to you in some of those follow-up resources. What the 3 words to think about that you would describe yourself as, not that a student or a teacher would describe you as.
I think it is actually showing, but it's not.
Could people nod if it's showing? It will be a grey screen. We've got some nodding and some sideways.
I don't know why it doesn't come up.
What I can see is a powers sheet and an adding decimals sheet.
No, that's not the one. Thanks for that. I'll try to get it up. Oh, it's not that
Was it that one there?
Yeah, that's what I clicked on. Unless I'm just going to have to
open it again. Or...
that's it there, isn't it? That one.
There we go.
Yeah. Oh, get rid of that. Good. Now.
Is that?
Yeah. Now I think it should bring it up. Let's hope. There we go.
Success. So then just a key snapshot we had there is that the art of teaching is the art of assisting discovery. And it's as much about the discovery of your curriculum, the discovery of your learners, and what we wanted to get across, the discovery of you as a teacher. You need to remove that pressure of being the perfect teacher on day 1 or term 1 or year 1, and being kind to yourself, which we're going to talk about later when we cover wellbeing. Yeah. So the next point on here, this is going to be very brief because I'd like to think we don't want to cover too much administration. But one thing you'll be aware of in your first and second year is those 6 standards for the teaching profession. This is actually much more than your first 2 years of teaching. Your entire teaching career, you should be thinking about these. They are organic in your teaching practice, but at the beginning, it is nice to remind yourself what those were. A few years ago, there were 12, and more recently, these were streamlined into the 6 different criteria. So as you'll be able to see there, we look at your teaching, design for learning, learning-focused culture, Te Tiriti o Waitangi partnership, professional learning, and also professional relationships. And down the bottom there, you'll notice the 4 values from the New Zealand Teaching Council, which are also integral across all schools in New Zealand. And this is ranging from early childhood, primary, intermediate, and secondary. So these are our big picture concepts that are more than just ticking a box, I hope. The irony, on the next slide, I've actually done some ticking of the boxes here. I used the word earlier about these being organic. So this afternoon, just in our conversations we'll be having on this webinar, you'll see there that we're talking about learning focused cultures. This is a form of professional learning, and the network that Andrew's building and the whole mathematics associations, which is incredibly impressive, is a professional relationship. These are always happening in your practice, but it's nice to remind yourself, as it might affirm you that you are on the right track rather than getting lost in the chaos that can sometimes feel like teaching. And you might notice down here, what you take from today's session, you might put into practice in your own classroom or your own planning, or even talking about colleagues with, and suddenly you're even reaching more of these 6 standards. So don't panic when you get to the end of the year and someone asks for all of your evidence. I think too often this can happen and you have a flurry of a week of madness where you're printing or finding things online and filing these into these 6 sections. You'll learn that you're actually ticking these off all the time because it's part of being a teacher. These are not tokenistic.
And everyone does these differently as well. Every school will have their system of doing this. So we were talking before about attempting not to compare yourself too much with other teachers from that point of view in this sort of area.
Absolutely. I think we actually were talking about, well, we didn't actually discover this one. We had a system called Aranui a few years ago in a school, and we would document our evidence and file it into these categories. Another system I've been in was printed and folders, which you're smiling.
Most of my career was that. Yes.
Yeah. The point is, it doesn't matter how you're getting this evidence. The essence of teaching, whether you're teaching at the top of the North Island or right down the bottom of New Zealand, is the same backbone of teaching. And those are these 6 dots, which actually inspired the name EDUdots as well. Yeah.
Cool.
We've been talking about this a bit, haven't we? We're going to quickly skim the surface of this one. We have already thought there's going to be a lot of room here to come back to this for a future webinar because it's quite a big topic, professional relationships. And when you mind map this in education, it's huge. One key thing to remember is the whakatauki that we've got on the screen there. He aha te mea no oi o te ao, he tangata, he tangata, he tangata. Teaching is 100% about people. And I haven't been teaching this year. You've had a very different role. We haven't been involved in the remote learning aspect, so I just want to very briefly give kudos to all of you right now, because you've gone through very different context and year of teaching that no one could have predicted last year. And with the lens of remote learning, people is still the essence.
Definitely. And this, for me, is something I think is the biggest thing I've learned as a maths teacher, and that's for all ages. The key to success and to instilling a bit of enthusiasm in students for maths is the relationship that you can build with them and how well you know them, how much they know about you as a person, and then they come into the classroom or the learning area and they see a person that they know, a person that knows them before the topic or subject of maths comes into it. Because I will mention it later, that we have a lot of students who are turned off maths, and we've got to try to turn that around, and we can, and this is the sort of thing that is at the forefront of trying to make that happen.
Yeah, I can quickly rewind to my own experiences as a math student there, and I look forward to when we talk about, you use the word traumatized by math. I wouldn't say I excelled in that area, but I can remember a variety of my math teachers. One actually allowed me to bring chocolate cake if I didn't do my homework. As long as I turned up with a slice of chocolate cake, I wouldn't actually get into any trouble with that. Over time, that turned into, I would then complete homework with him eating his chocolate cake, the other students that hadn't done this. And I actually feel, in hindsight, manipulated, that it was all a form of creating the soft exterior to then help us learn, which at the time I thought I was getting away with not doing work at home, but it was a different learning strategy in action.
Some more important learning was happening actually behind the scenes without you even know.
Absolutely not. Yeah, naive teenager. The key thing with relationships and teaching, you probably have been following a lot of readings over the past few years around automation and jobs and what's going to exist and what's not. There's actually a lot of debate around how much teaching will be person, how much will be face-to-face, how much will be a form of AI. It's, we'd like to say, safe to say, people are integral to this career, and relationship building is one of those foundation aspects, which when we talk about your lesson plan shortly, we're under the assumption that you've built relationships with students first.
Yeah, definitely. We might want to touch on just how to make sure that you are having appropriate relationships with young people, and how to know where that happens, and how to build the relationship that's going to make them positive about their learning, and know when you've done that, and to have the student know when they've done that. Young people aren't that clear on the type of relationship they're building with their parents, with other adults, and with each other, and that takes a long time. It took me probably 5 or more years of my teaching to become very confident about who I knew and how well I knew them, and how well I felt that the different students knew me. It's quite subtle, and it does come with experience. It is and there's no quick way to do it, really. It's experience.
Yeah. I might get you to talk more about your observation as a primary teacher and a secondary teacher and how those might differ. But just to remind you while you're watching the webinar, when we're covering these aspects at the moment, because we are wanting to go through some of them, if you're thinking of questions, just jot them down because we'll come back to that towards the end, or send them through on Zoom and we'll go from there. Just because we want to make sure we're actually giving you some of the help you need and what you want answered. So as a primary teacher to a secondary teacher, any key difference or notes with relationships?
Yeah, the first thing that I noticed in jumping from primary to secondary, and I started with my first 3 years as a primary teacher, year 5 and 6. Then I did another 3 years or 2 years of year 7 and 8, and then to secondary school. And in my observations and watching what was happening, I felt that overall primary teachers tended to teach the person first and the subject second, and secondary teachers tended to teach their subject first and the person second. And I thought that was a bit of a shame, and I felt definitely that secondary teachers had a lot to learn from primary teachers with respect to putting the person first. That's really the big statement that I found.
I can jump in there. I'm not going to play devil's advocate because imagine that, just this live debate on the webinar. We've got a really nice mix today of people that have joined us, which is awesome, from a couple of primary, intermediate, secondary. One thing that we fall into the trap of very quickly in secondary, that's my background there, is the concept of assessment, specifically the senior and NCEA, and we do get caught up in the ball rolling around that as opposed to that foundation of relationships. We also discussed what your structure is at your school, whether you're a 45 to a 50-minute timetable or even a 90 to 100, and how that might influence how you plan. And when we send follow-up resources around structuring, we hope to share some little tips around how you might build strategies into covering relationships off every lesson as opposed to just content, which can be done in do nows. I recall at the beginning of my teaching being really upset actually, and some of the questions that came through on the Google form, thank you, Andrew and I were looking over those earlier in the week and again this afternoon. And it can be hard not to take offense to the way students sometimes act or treat you. I had a colleague once word it as you need to develop your Teflon skin. So you don't view it as a personal affront and realize it's not a criticism on you. The experience I'm alluding to, I think I was in my second year of teaching. I had a student arrive late to my lesson. That's fine, things happen. But he proceeded to ignore me. And at the time, I remember getting a little bit like, I'm using the same structure. I've done the same greeting I've done for fear. I've told him where to sit. I haven't made a big deal about it because I can tell from his body language something's happened at lunchtime. He's not in a good mood, and tried to get on with it. He didn't acknowledge being sat down, saying hello, a resource given to him. I lent him a pen because I could see he didn't have one, didn't acknowledge that. And it was very out of character for this young boy. It got to the point where his body language continued to kind of sink in. Something was wrong. I tried to probe and ask, how are you feeling? Are you comfortable being here? Because sometimes students need to get a walk or go for a fresh air. And it was around now that I was actually starting to feel emotional about it, like teary, because I wasn't crying yet. I'm sure some of us have all had those moments at work, I hope, part of becoming a teacher possibly. And I realized I couldn't get through to him in this moment. And I had to discreetly go across to a teacher who was, 10 meters away their classroom and just ask if they could come and chat to them. And he happily got up and moved when this teacher asked. That for me was when it felt personal because I had been ignored, but this other teacher had been successful. And that was, what did I learn from that encounter? At the time, didn't think I learned a single thing, aside from feeling ignored. A few days later, the students spoke to me. Something had happened at lunchtime, and they felt safe by demonstrating that behavior towards me. So the concept sometimes when students misbehave, and I'm not saying this works in all instances for every student though, the bigger picture might be, you might be the person they feel comfortable acting like that in front of. Maybe you're the person that they think they can continue to get some form of support from you to show you such behavior. Kind of like having a child. You might take your kid out in public and they're an absolute saint or an angel, but then they have tantrums for you because they know that you're the safe person, you're consistent and you're there for them. So the bigger picture behind student behavior is an interesting one. And we looked at one of the questions was around how you deal with rude students. We do not have a silver bullet answer for that one. Not at all. I think if there were any silver bullets in education, some of us would be out of a job because it would just be too easy. Wouldn't have to worry about a thing. So we're going to come back to that question later on. But thank you very much for putting that in there. And we do recognize that it can be hard when you're feeling like that. And we'll hope to cover some of that shortly. One other aspect on relationships very quickly. I don't know if anyone's experienced Marg Thorsborn, Australian woman. Yep. So I was lucky enough to attend some PD, of which
I was there.
You were there too.
Yeah.
And a really awesome acronym she left us with was TUMS. So TUMS. And it was a very approachable strategy each lesson to use. And it was touch, use name, make eye contact, and smile. Don't need to say the word appropriate touch. It might be something like, hi Andrew, great to see you. And you know where your students are at with doing things. If you don't feel comfortable, it might be use name, make eye contact, smile. But acknowledging a person when they've come to your classroom is so important. Think if it's period 5 or block 3 at the end of the day. If no one's used that student's name all day and suddenly they come into your classroom, hi Andrew, it's great to have you here today. They're recognized as an individual. And it's...
And when you say that, I feel many of our listeners will be going through their head and thinking, well, how can I do that? That's going to take the first 5-10 minutes of my lesson. But it doesn't actually necessarily have to be the teacher either. You form up partners and get them to talk to each other, get them to use each other's name so that the students realize how important this is as well, and can think about how they're coming across to others and encouraging others to feel comfortable. Yeah.
And the smile one, I wish I could see more faces on here. Some of you are brave and you've got live cameras on, which is awesome. I can see you smiling now because we're talking about the smile topic. Some of you have got smiley photos frozen on there. I was naively smiling back at those for a long time until I realized they were photos and you weren't moving. But a smile goes such a long way. When I'm not a teacher, ironically, I'm really bad at not smiling because my relaxed face is, I can't do it now, I just laugh, but quite expressionless. I have to remind myself in lessons when I'm doing that, especially when students ask a question and I have my relaxed face on, I'm probably looking at them like, what planet are you on? Rather than acknowledging what they're trying to ask. So reminding
students
ourselves.
notice it. I have had that pointed out to me. Students are very, very quick at trying to determine your mood by your facial expression. And they pointed out, I've had primary students say, why aren't you smiling? You don't smile enough. You're grumpy.
Yeah.
I had good reason to be grumpy in my opinion, but yeah, they notice it and it's very, very powerful. Yeah.
And the last point on relationships before we move on, and it's awesome to see we've got some deputy principals in here and some that are in charge of the internal policies and processes in your schools. When you're first inducted into a school, you'll be made familiar with these. And if you aren't, or you feel like you want to know more, ask. Because knowing what your school approach towards things is really important. We were talking about concepts like discipline or restorative practice, and that might change what the whole school does so you can be on the same page as well.
Yeah, students do definitely look out for consistency or lack of from one teacher to the next. Students know, and absolutely that is a key aspect of a successful school is how consistent the students feel as teachers are when it comes to that type of thing.
Yeah, good cop, bad cop. They will very quickly learn what lessons they'll go to late, what ones they won't. Depending on school rules or expectations, socks pulled up, socks not. There's a whole very, very rules here of that that they filter through them very quickly. Teenagers know a lot, as do all students, I believe. So we're going to look on to a good math lesson. So Andrew's going to cover this with us shortly, but just before we go into it, we've skimmed over relationships. This is assuming that you've spent time building those in your classroom. Often at the beginning of a year, you might actually designate the first 1 to 2 weeks establishing those, getting that culture going of what your classroom is like, making sure you know the students, that is their curriculum levels, their learning styles, who they can and maybe possibly should not sit beside. You might learn that the easy way or the hard way, but either way, as long as it's learned somewhere along the way. This has occurred so you can then start having effective lessons. An effective lesson without having those relationships and those understanding of where the learner's at, I think is a bit of a whoosh. A lot of mahi has to go into building that solid foundation first.
Yeah, definitely. And that can put you under pressure. You're feeling a lot of time pressure to get things done, particularly in secondary school when you've got a very clear number of clear content that you're wanting to deliver, and you feel that building relationships is going to get in the way, particularly with short lessons, but it absolutely makes a huge difference, particularly later in the year. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through my idea of a model maths lesson. Be aware, this is not what everyone must do. You have to develop yourself, your own differences, and everyone is a little bit different, but here's some of my ideas about it. And the first thing I said is I'm assuming that you do have, first of all, a good relationship with or you have built a relationship with the students. So you know them, they know you as best you can. So, and also that involves some routines and expectations when they arrive at your classroom too. This is a real key thing to have. I like to have students come and know what they've got to do immediately without an instruction. So I have a starter on the board, starter questions. And this, I've done this right from year 5 right through to year 13. They know to expect that. They know that they should actually come in, sit down and get on with it. They know the type of questions are likely to be to do with the material we've been learning in previous lessons. So it's relevant. And a few other things I'll get into, because that starter, and I've got a couple of examples, that starter is differentiated. I will have 6 to 10 questions on the board. I'll show you my one if I can bring that up without too much difficulty.
Well, Andrew's bringing that up. A key thing he's just said is about having it differentiated. The great thing about having a starter or a do now, it's an instant feeling of success. So maybe don't make a incredibly hard starter, because within the first 5 minutes, a student is going to feel like they can't achieve. Whereas if you're able to entice them into the learning in a softer manner, it's going to set the rest of the lesson up more effectively as well.
Yeah, so hopefully everyone can see at least the one that I've got up there for year 9, 10 and 11 approximately, and it's to do with powers. And this would assume that they've had some teaching of powers, probably up to powers of fractions like number 4. If you can't see that, just yell out. So the first question, I'm expecting everyone in the classroom to be able to get that right. If they sit down and get on with it and they've got their book and they've got their pen and all that, I'd expect everyone to be able to do the first one. I would expect probably 1 or 2 or 3 of a typical size class to be able to deal with question 6. A lot of the class, the majority of the class, probably would not get to number 5. It's not something that they have to complete everything, but they should have a routine of attempting and realizing the importance of going as far as they can. Some kids will be lazy and think, oh yeah, I only need to get to number 3 because Mr. Marshall said that that was okay. But the idea is that they challenge by choice. I've got to build that culture in the room where they're going to want to get further and challenge themselves and do something that's a bit harder. So question 5, there's a negative power. This is typically something that for the start of the class would not have been taught yet. And some kids will moan and complain, so, well, how do you expect me to do that if you haven't taught me? And I'm like, well, I'm expecting you to use your initiative and have a go at something you've never seen before. That's the sort of culture I'd like to be able to produce. Question 6 is an open-ended question. That's the idea there, and it involves estimation as well. I think that's one of the biggest untapped, if you like, skill in maths, is that we do not promote enough estimation. In fact, in the real world, that's more that we do more estimation than any other type of maths. So I always like to have one in there. I like to have an open-ended question, one that doesn't necessarily even have an answer. It takes kids a while to get used to that in a maths class, that they have questions like that. But the idea is to get them thinking. I'll just swap now to the one that I produced for primary school.
One thing that I like that Andrew just said was, even if they hadn't quite learnt some of those higher skills there, giving it a go and the culture you establish. So if that is something that had been built over time, getting the answer correct isn't necessarily evidence of learning. Engaging and trying to do it is learning. That's the brain in action. So being able to get that across to learners, that giving things a go, exploring and what you learn along the way is sometimes just as valuable as getting it right.
Absolutely. And that takes some students a long time, particularly if they've come through some very traditional maths classes leading into your own class and different type of thinking. Yep. So hopefully you can see the one I made there for year 5, 6, and 7 approximately. So level 3 of the curriculum, dealing with decimals. By the way, I'll just mention a couple of little hints here that I learnt early on, and that you'll notice I've put number 1 and I've put a bracket around it before the question.
Oh, of course.
I've put full stops often, and many students were confused. They thought, oh, it's 1.3 plus 2.5. You've got to be quite careful about how you present your information. Again, I've also handwritten these questions as I would on the board or even digitally. I shy away from producing actual digital printed type font or writing. A student once told me that they prefer to see my handwritten writing on the board than a digital thing because it looked more informal and less intimidating for them. And just something as simple as that can actually is worth considering.
Different learning styles.
Even the color of ink that you use. Even there are some students I know who actually can read better if it is a blue color than black. So
and if a student has Ireland syndrome, if they can see reds and greens as well, which you'll know in advance.
So this started very similar to the secondary one. 7 questions. The first question, I would expect everybody in the class to be able to do it based on my knowledge of the class and what we did in the previous lesson. The second question would be more of probably the new concept from the previous lesson to remind them of it. Then moving on to questions that maybe they have not seen yet, but they have some skill to attempt and try to work out for themselves. There's a couple of open-ended ones. This one I like, number 5. If 3.14 was the answer, what was the question? A bit more creative. You'll get lazy kids who just say, oh, it must be just 3.14 plus 0.
That reminds me of that what day's Sunday pop culture Father's Day reference. That's my brain as a student. That's what I would do. Number 6.
Find the mistake and explain why it happened. Now, many students will have a go at number 6 and correct it and think they've got the whole question right, but actually the key is this: explain why do you think it happened? What was the mistake that the person might have done to get that answer, to get them to look a bit more deeply at what they're seeing. Number 7, open-ended one. A human hair is less than 1 millimeter thick. Estimate how thick it is in millimeters, I meant to say, using decimals, and explain how you came up with this estimate. And again, some kids won't like it because they'll say, oh, but there is no real answer. I'm not going to be right or wrong. I don't want to do that one. But actually the thinking that is in place there, particularly the top kids, if they're going to tell you, well, I think it's 0.1 millimeter, and I think this because I was looking at my neighbor and I was looking at their hair and thinking, if I line that up, how many would fit in a millimeter? I'm not sure.
Our hair would probably be quite different as well.
And then, I mean, there's no end to that question that you could argue with that student or discuss with that student. Think about the different hair of different people. Is it the same thickness? And there's some interesting cultural differences in people's thickness of hair and so on.
Well, I like that because it connects to other subjects. I think 2 questions came through around integrated learning and collaborative learning, and I can see 2 different subject areas in there very easily that would have similar skills in the response to that.
Yep. So I'll leave it there. I love my little starters and I love coming up with them, and it helps me when I write them before the lesson, and I usually write them less than a day before the lesson because the questions depend on what I've seen the students do in the previous lesson. Now, so that's the starter. Let me move on. We're running out of time. There does need to be a goal or objective at the beginning of the lesson that is clear for everybody. It does not need to be the same for every student.
So would you call this like a learning outcome or some of the success criteria, objective?
Absolutely. And something that's not necessarily, measurable ultimately, but very clear to the student as to whether they've achieved it or not at the end of the lesson. I'd like to have a goal for myself, something that I want to learn, and I make that clear to the students that I'm here to learn a little bit more about how you're thinking about this concept, or I'm here to learn how to solve a particular problem myself in maths. I'd love to see maths teachers do that more in front of the kids.
How to engage students is my problem today.
Yeah, absolutely. That could be written on the board. It could be verbal. It could be digital, depending on how you're running the lesson.
At the table, ready for them to see.
Yep. And then obviously the main part of your lesson is going to be introducing some sort of new concept or content with them, and then allowing them to practice that, with time for the teacher to be able to answer questions individually as much as possible, and also attempting to allow time at the end. This is very important, and that's for the teacher to be able to get some indication as to how well the new concept has sunk in. This is generally not done that well. The bell goes or time ticks by and it's like they're still stuck and engaged in the work. And it's like, right, we're gonna have to stop now, let's go, off you go. It is absolutely valuable to stop 5-10 minutes before the end of the lesson and have some sort of routine. And there are lots of different methods for doing this, some faster than others, whatever. We can mention some in the feedback perhaps if we can. But just ways that you can gain from the students how well you think they've grasped the material that's gone on.
I've seen exit cards, and like Andrew said, we'll put some in the follow-up resources, even a continuum from the door to I've grasped it 100% to I'm not that confident. Suddenly that line becomes your grouping or your focus groups in a future lesson because you've been able to see where they've put themselves. So like you say, 5 to 10 minutes is all you need, but it's invaluable with what ground you're going to make off knowing where the kids are with what you've covered in the lesson instead of continuing to move on.
I missed a little one out too there, and I like to attempt to get them to think about what next. What is their next learning going to be? What will happen in the next lesson, for example, and so on, looking ahead as well.
Future goals.
Now, that's just my little snapshot. There'll be lots of things that you can come up with that I could add to that to make it better, and lots of different ways. I haven't even talked about grouping in the class and things like that. But
we had a few questions on grouping. So we've chatted over that. And again, we'll try and cover that in the follow-up. There were basically 3 or 4 different webinars that arose out of those questions. So it's great to know what's on top for everyone. And we do hope that we'll be able to cover those in coming discussions as well.
Yep, good.
So we're going to, again, look at some math in a modern context. And I'm hoping that Andrew entices a few people, a few provocations with what he thinks about mathematics, whether that's in school or actually I think it's kind of more philosophical, some of what you're going to talk about in life. And hopefully we'll plant some seeds here that will get questions firing up that we can talk further about shortly.
Yep, so very quickly then. Here's some things that might provoke a bit of discussion or controversy. They're not the opinions of any maths association or yourself. They're just my observations as a maths teacher. I've got some of the quotes, by the way, from this book, Maths Recess, just came out, about play-based learning at all levels. Really, really interesting read. It's just come out by Sunil Singh. It says there, our education system has not and never has worked reliably well to teach the majority of students maths. And in fact, that's Dan Finkel saying that in the introduction. There are generations of mathematically traumatized people in our world. These are facts, basically. Earlier. Yep. The majority, this is my opinion now, the majority of maths teachers teach maths the way that they were taught it, despite the changing needs of education. The nature of maths education is such that curriculum coverage tends to be considered more important than many other aspects of learning. And this is a statement that I challenge. I don't feel deep down that it is as important as we make it out to. It's going to be received quite differently in different schools. And I think as teachers, we need to be willing to turn the curriculum upside down and look at just how flexible it is and what we can do.
Which takes bravery and also support behind you to be able to do that, to explore further and completely flip it on its head.
We need more maths teachers who are genuinely passionate about the subject. Full stop. Simple as that.
Is that because passion's contagious? If you've got a teacher like that in front of you, you as a student are going to be inspired. And
Yep. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means exactly. A passionate mathematics teacher sees maths, the big picture of maths, not just the small bit of content that students are learning. And I've got other books here. This one here, you'll laugh at this one. My history of maths textbook from university.
Just wipe the dust off this.
Very boring looking, but all of you need to have some understanding of where this subject has come from. There's an amazingly rich and colourful history in maths, and all maths teachers need to have some sort of understanding of that, because it so helps you see the bigger picture of where maths fits in the whole history of human culture. Actually, one of the oldest subjects that students learn at school.
I'm even thinking of Egyptian pyramids when you're just talking about that in math learning, but that's almost sort of project based in some ways. Digressing.
Yep. Other things to add to this passion of maths is philosophy of maths, and many people won't even realize there is a philosophy of maths. It's not as clear cut as it appears to be taught in schools. Mathematics is something people have created. People have felt the need to create this. Why? Let's look at that. We don't often do that, unfortunately, and I reckon we lose a lot of students just because they're not looking at why are we learning this, who was it that invented it, and why. Anyway, I'll finish at that part there. Hopefully that's given you something to think about from that point of view. I was going to mention a couple of other books.
What's that? Disobedience. Is it disobedient teaching?
Disobedient teaching. We saw an excellent talk by this guy, Welby Ings at AUT, just looking a lot at the way we do assessment and giving us a lot to think about.
Welby's fantastic if you're ever able to get him into a school or go to one of his workshops. How he approaches the concept of creativity was a really key takeaway that I had when observing him. I think he spoke about a coat hanger and how many ways you can use an object, and that's a form of creativity, and how it can encourage students to realize that they're more than they think they are when we break down definitions of things. Likewise in mathematics, when you understand why something is, maybe you're suddenly wanting to know more.
Yeah, for sure. By the way, we've had a comment here. Mathagon, a good website, has a great timeline.
Oh, thanks, Ruth. That's fantastic. Good. I'll write that down as well.
We did make a list of websites worth knowing about. YouTube, though, worth going on and searching on YouTube. Some really enthusiastic, new, innovative stuff happening with various people on YouTube. So we will put a list in our information that we send out.
Yeah, we'll add Ruth's suggestion. With our follow-up, we were wanting to link into some resources, sites, websites, books, because a few questions did arise with those links, and we also want to cover those for you as well. We spoke informally about Instagram and how it's quite easy to follow educational pages on that, and you trick yourself into scrolling on your social feed, and suddenly you might get sparked by a comment or an activity, and it's a matter of bookmarking and saving things, and it's a good teaching tip to pick up ideas quickly.
Yep, definitely. Very good. Well, I think we are running out of time.
Yeah.
We've gone quite long.
Crikey.
We haven't had a lot of questions, so we've allowed us to go quite long. How do you feel? We look at some of the questions that they put in the registration, or do you think we're going to have to end it there?
I might just quickly put it on that wellbeing share. Was it on when you do screen share? It's my last slide there.
Yep. Hopefully that comes up.
We've looked over your questions, and we're hoping the follow-up template we send out from here will cover some. Will that open there? You just click on that one. That one. Yeah. And we're hoping to cover those again. We might not have time to delve into them now, but we do just want to reiterate, it's probably the 5th or 6th time we've mentioned it, that we have looked at them, we've discussed them, and we're going to be sending out points on those, because being responsive to what you've said is important rather than this one size fits all sort of presentation. So I think, is the screen share on? We'll just put screen share on and try and end on an aspect of well-being.
Should be that, shouldn't it? It's not coming up again.
There we go.
There we go.
And then that group, that will make it the full one, I think. Perfect. So this is just repeating what we mentioned earlier. But we did want to end on very briefly well-being in our final sort of 2 to 3 minute wrap up here. In teaching, you have to look after yourself. You burn out very quickly. One thing we spoke about was the holidays and how you're either going to get sick in the final 2 weeks leading up to the holidays, or Murphy's Law, day one of the holidays, because it catches up with you. So 3 key takeaways here. Be kind to yourself as a beginning teacher. don't expect to be the perfect teacher on day one. Every lesson, every day, every week, you're learning something and you are becoming a stronger teacher. You may not realize it at the time, but the power of hindsight, all of those experiences are little foundation building blocks to make you stronger as a teacher. Take time to recharge. Don't spend your entire weekend planning or marking or stewing on something that happened the week before. That one can be easier said than done. This one made us laugh. Gain perspective. Really, really challenging not to compare yourself as a teacher, but a dangerous trap to fall into. The beauty, I think, for students is that in their course of schooling, they have a range of teachers. You learn so much by having different people in front of you, and you should value how you're unique as a teacher and what that is subconsciously also teaching learners. And the last point here was time management. If we could say one of the follow-up resources here was this free time we can give you as well, I'm sure this would be the most popular webinar in education ever. But at the beginning of teaching, time is a hot commodity, as I think it probably is the whole way through teaching. It's quite normal that you're planning lesson to lesson, and then eventually that becomes week to week. And further on down the track, that becomes term to term, because you're becoming stronger, you're starting to gain foresight, but more importantly, you're confident in what you're doing and why. So be kind on yourself. Don't think you need to be that perfect teacher yet or ever. I know when I'm back in the classroom, I'm still always becoming stronger and learning. You never stop learning as a teacher.
Absolutely. That's the mindset to have. And also, just hearing that list made me think of how important it is to surround yourself with the people who are going to help support you in those things there. It is quite easy in a school to get bogged down by others who are complaining a lot because of their struggling and so on. And you've got to be very, very careful to choose to surround yourself with the people who are going to help you to actually.
Did you look at our Instagram account today for EDUdots?
No, only Facebook.
Well, this is a coincidence. Today, one of our posts there today was about surrounding yourself with the right people on Instagram. So check that out, because you'll realize that people that are around you are the influence. It's that 5 people. And there's a whole lot of articles and tips on there too. So I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. I just checked. We don't think we've had any school presentations or something. Yep. Okay, good. So we're going to have to end it there. We have gone a bit longer than I intended.
Awesome.
Thanks for your input, and thanks for registering. Everybody who registered, even if they're not here watching live, will get all the information afterwards, including the link to the video. And if you feel that there's content here that you want others to hear, you just send on the link and get everybody to just pitch in and share it. That's the best we can do, I think, to get the support out there to everybody. Stay tuned for more similar content webinars coming up. We do have a maths conference at the end of the year where I hope we will be doing some more of this, and if not, expanding a bit. And also feel free to email me directly if there's anything in particular that you'd like to hear about in a forthcoming webinar. And finally, I'd just like to thank Jordan for giving up the time and sharing what you're doing, which is really exciting and great for teaching.
Thanks for having us. And kudos to all of you right now, because you're doing an amazing job. Term 3 of a crazy teaching year. So more support like this from Andrew and other initiatives are fantastic. And I wish you all the best with the rest of the term and the year ahead.
Cool. Keep up the good work. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
See you later.